everyone, and welcome to the Birth Bootcamp podcast. I am Hollie Hopley, the CEO.
I'm Robmikia Holman, the administrator.
And today you get the both of us again to just tell you whatever we think, like we did a few weeks ago. So today's episode, we are going to be talking about why someone might decide to give birth in the hospital. I know we also talked about a few episodes back about why some people choose to have an out-of-hospital birth. So we're going to do the opposite today. 99% of women are delivering in the hospital.
Right.
And I think as doulas and childbirth educators, it's just important to be prepared for that, because that's where a majority of people are having their babies. Now I do know with COVID and, a lot more people are looking at out of hospital options. They're becoming more popular. Celebrities are having their babies, at home. And so more and more people are hearing about out of hospital birth. But still, most people are delivering, at the hospital.
Hospital, right.
Yep. So I know for me personally, I had 3 out of my 4 kids in the hospital. What about you? I think you had all of them in the hospital, right?
Yeah, I had all 4 of mine in the hospital.
Yep. Yeah. With mine, so with my first, I did it just because that's what you do.
Right.
I didn't really know that an out of hospital birth was an option. It was just, you just go to the hospital and that's it. But I was really lucky that I had I was seeing a CNM, and she encouraged us to take a class. And so we took a class. And as I learned about all the things, I was like, well, I don't want all the things. I was like, I don't want to be, hooked up to all the things. I don't want an IV. So we kind of were like, well, I guess we're doing it without all the things. And so we hired a doula super last minute. I hired her when I was 38 weeks and had him at 39 weeks on the day.
Oh, wow.
So hired her super last minute. But it worked out really well. Yeah. Labored at home most of my labor because we lived down the street from the hospital. And, showed up and had a really awesome experience. And I think it's because we took that childbirth class, because we did the research, because we practiced all the things and we're really prepared, and had a doula. And so with my second one, we pretty much did the exact same thing, same midwife, same everything, because again, it was still like I had heard about birth centers, and I'm pretty sure we actually did research on the one that was in our area. We were just in a small rural area in Idaho, and there weren't really many options.
Ask, where were you located at the time? So
that was just, okay. Yeah, there weren't really a lot of options. So I think we looked at it and we were like, yeah, we'll just do this, because we were also like, we did it once. We were comfortable with that. We were like, I had become a doula at that point. I had worked with the midwives there even more. So I was like, well, we'll just do this. And kind of same thing, like great birth, same midwife, everything was good. It was my third that we decided to do a home birth, but we were planning to do a hospital birth until I was about 30-ish weeks. And I was like, we were in Texas at this time. And I was like, I'm tired of driving to downtown Fort Worth. I was like, I'm tired of them treating me not high risk. There was just one particular midwife who didn't like the fact that I didn't want to take the glucose test. But I was willing to monitor my blood sugar, she didn't like that I wasn't doing everything she said. And so that's when I was like, I'm done with this. I was like, I know a million midwives. I know all these things. So that's when we switched between 30 and 32 weeks.
Because you didn't comply with what she wanted you to do.
Right.
In a roundabout way, they labeled you as.
Right. Yeah. I guess I was like the troublemaker or whatever.
Stir in a pot every time you come in for your visit.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, so that's when I switched and had my third at home. Best decision ever. So happy I did that. But then my fourth, we had moved. My husband had just graduated. We moved up here to Utah for his job. And everything in both of us were like, we'll just do another home birth. Like, no, duh. But we just both had that gut feeling that I should be in the hospital the whole entire pregnancy. We thought that. And so when you have those feelings, you listen to them. And so we did, and everything was fine. I mean, it worked out well. I was with a group of CNMs again. I mean, really great birth, showed up at 9 centimeters. I was in complete denial that I was in labor because I was only 38 weeks. I had never had a baby that early before. I mean, not that he was early, but complete surprise. It was also my daughter's birthday. And so I was like, nope, I'm not in labor. I was in complete denial, slept through most of it, woke up, and my husband was like, I'm calling our doula. I was like, fine. I was like, I don't think this is it. And she gets to my house and she's like, we need to go to the hospital right now. So, so really 3 really awesome hospital experiences. And I think sometimes especially with other birth professionals, sometimes the hospital can get, like people can think that like nobody should go to the hospital, all hospitals are bad and we should avoid them and we should avoid all the interventions and all that kind of stuff. But like you can have a great birth experience in the hospital. And I know that both of us have helped lots of people have, great hospital births and things like that. So I just hate when people talk so negatively about them.
Right, because there's, and I think a lot of that has to do, I mean, with one experience, but your experience isn't the next person's experience. But I think in society we are so eager to share the negative things, and not that they're not important, but it's just as much as we're eager to share the negative things about different experiences, only because we didn't like those experiences or we don't like, that particular location, that birthing environment, it doesn't mean that it's not a good place for someone else, So, so I had all 4 of my children in a hospital setting. And really because, I didn't know any different. I always talk to couples about, just because mama did it this way or auntie did it this way or grandma did it this way, doesn't mean you have to do it this way. But in my community, in the area that I grew up in, like in my family, like no one that I knew of had their, their babies outside of a hospital setting. Now, granted, my grandmother did, but that we're talking about years and years ago. But we're talking, if we come to current, my auntie, my mom, cousins, things like that, they were all in a hospital setting. So I didn't know any different at that time. And I didn't even know to go seeking anything different. Like I had never heard of a midwife or nurse midwife. I had never heard of a home birth. I figured people probably were having their babies at home, but I've expressed before like what I thought that was. Like that was weird. Who does that? So I just wasn't privy to that experience. And granted, now that I know different, I know more. There probably would have been, thinking back on my birth, there probably was at least maybe 2, if not 3 of them that probably would have been great in a home birth setting. But then, I do have one that definitely needs to be in a hospital setting. So I won't say that I had negative experiences because I didn't know any different. My first child was young, very young. And so I did exactly what, my doctors and nurses instructed me to do. So, but I think when I had a C-section with our third, who was Frank Breech, I had a little bit of, not even knowledge, but I knew I wanted to do something different. So my 4th was a VBAC, and I labored at home, and I didn't labor at home with education. I just labored at home because I didn't, go into the hospital. Like I didn't want that same experience that I had before with my 3rd kid. So, but I won't say they were negative experiences because I didn't know anything different. I think I was treated, um, I guess back then I could say I was probably treated appropriately, but knowing what I know now,
Mm-hmm.
definitely would have had some different, some different questions. So
Yeah. Yep.
when you know
But I
better,
think, but
you
you were,
you
yeah,
expect
you were
better.
doing the best you had with the information and
Yeah,
knowledge that you did.
yeah,
And so,
yeah,
yeah. Yep.
yeah. So there are when you're planning to deliver in a hospital setting, you can encounter different types of providers. And so a few of those providers, a lot of people have OBs. And then you already mentioned, I think you said you had a nurse midwife
Mm-hmm.
at your birth. So um, what would you think the difference between like the OB and a nurse midwife would be?
Well, I think so. I will say this, back then when we chose to go the midwife route, so before my first child, I had had a miscarriage previously. And so with that miscarriage, it was very early. We had just found out I was pregnant. And so, obviously for a first time mom, the bleeding starts, all that kind of stuff. So go to the OB because that's what you do.
Right.
And I was a number. Um, they did not seem to care. They were like, well, you have a negative RH factor, you have this and blah, 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 and we're going to do this. And then it pretty much was like, okay, here's your shot. Bye. Good luck. Like there was just, I was like, well, that was not
Not what
really
you expected.
helpful.
Yeah.
No, like just very impersonable, very rushed, very, you know, not helpful.
Yeah.
And so that's why I was like, well, I'm never going back there ever again. And I got pregnant again probably about 3 or 4 months later. And a friend, because we were living in such a small town, there really weren't a ton of options. Um,
Mhm.
but a friend of mine there, she was like, there is a group of midwives that deliver at the hospital. She was like, go see them. They're so much better. And just, we had longer appointments and I felt like I could ask questions and I felt like they had time to learn
Right.
about me, and to know what I want and really take care of me. And they included my husband a lot more and, um, things like that. And so that's kind of the common theme that I hear a lot with the difference between OBs and midwives. Um, but it really, gosh, the longer I've been doing this, the more it really depends on the group of midwives that you're with, because some act just like OBs. You might hear the term a midwife, yeah, they're a midwife, but they tend to lean towards using more interventions and things like that. Um, and the longer that I've done it, I've also seen really great OBs. I have worked with some
Right.
really
Yeah.
awesome OBs who I it's like they're a midwife in sheep's clothing. So it's
Hmm.
um, so to me now, it's not necessarily, oh, if you have a midwife, you're going to have a better birth experience or whatever at the hospital. It's more of finding the
It's your
right
provider.
finding
Yeah.
the right care
Yeah.
provider for you that's going to support you in the type of birth that you want.
Hmm.
That when you show them your birth plan, they don't roll their eyes and say, well, we don't do that here, and things like that. And when you do
Right.
ask questions, they answer them and they take that time for you, and you don't feel like a number,
Mm.
because you can have really crappy OBs or you can have really awesome OBs, and same thing with midwives.
Yes, I
um
totally agree with that.
so it's just really, and that's what I love, when people come through our classes and our birth boot camp classes, we are always talking about ask these questions, don't be afraid to ask these questions, and if you feel like you can't, you know
Right.
that's a red flag. And it's also
That is a
never too late to change your care provider.
Yeah.
um
As long as baby is inside, you have options.
mhm, yeah,
Hmm.
it can be a little bit trickier the further along you are, but
Right.
I mean, yeah. So I think that that's more important than just, an OB or a midwife. is just making sure you have the right one.
And I know you mentioned, making sure that you're asking your provider the right questions. That's one thing I like about our supporting arms booklet that that doulas can give to their doula clients is like inside that booklet, there's a list of questions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like thought provoking. You don't have to go question by question in that book, but it does put your client in a position to like, oh, I didn't think about asking this question. I should ask this question. And then arming them with the tools on how to ask, certain questions. So I think it's really important that you find the right provider for you, whether it be an OB or a nurse midwife, or if it's a practitioner in a family practice. I think it's important to ask those questions to make sure you're connecting with the provider that's ideal for you.
Yeah. And something that we talk a lot about is just how the two most important decisions you'll make about your birth is your birthplace and your care provider. Like those are the top two. Everything else kind of comes after that.
They're impactful. It can make a world of difference on how your birth is going to play out.
Yep, it really can. Yep. Okay, so let's talk about more reasons why people might choose a hospital birth, other than that's what you do, because that's still the prevalent because that's just what you do.
That's just what you do.
I feel like I've been hearing a lot lately of people they've had their first baby and now they're pregnant with their second, and they're like, well, my doctor told me I was high risk. Have you heard that?
Yeah.
I feel like I'm hearing that a lot lately. And I'm like, well, what's high risk? Like, what does that mean? Because that means a lot of different things to different people. When people, and they'll say, well, my pregnancy was fairly healthy. Like, and I'm not a doctor, I'm not a care provider. And I'm like, that doesn't bring up any red flags to me, and they're like, I really want an unmedicated birth. Maybe they're looking at an out of hospital birth, but they're like, but I'm high risk. And I'm like, well, go talk to the midwives, maybe these birth centers or something, and find out what that really means, what that really looks like. Because yes, there's definitely times that you can be high risk and that you should be in the hospital. Like 100% that happens.
Yeah, there's definitely reasons why. High risk, like you could have to choose the hospital birth. But I think also don't just take your high risk. Like you ask, well, why? Like, what is that medical reason? Like, what is that explanation? Like, don't be afraid to ask for the reason.
Yeah. Yep. Do you feel like some people just feel more comfortable or more safe in the hospital?
I think they do. I think that they do have, we talk about your body knows, what it's doing. Your body was created for this. And I think a lot of people are confident in their bodies are going to do, but what if? It's always the what if this happens. I've had clients who, they're either their sisters may have experienced a traumatic birth, or their mom may have experienced a traumatic birth. And so this could be like their first, and they could just feel like, well, just in case something happens, I feel more comfortable being in a hospital setting where there's, the medical equipment is readily available. Even though there's not any inkling that, those births are all different. Everyone's birth is different. There's not, you're not high risk. There's not any issues, but I just really feel like either mom feels more comfortable in a hospital setting, or her support person doesn't feel comfortable outside of a hospital setting. Because I think if a couple is not on the same page, whether it be, whatever your spouse, your significant other, whomever, if they're not on the same page, I think that does play a huge part in whether, you end up having a hospital birth.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like sometimes people have I think of like a false sense of security
That's good. Yeah.
In the hospital. A lot of people are surprised when I tell them, when we talk about the statistics and the kind of like the crisis that we have in our maternity care system, and the infant and maternal mortality rates in the United States, and how ours have risen and they have continued to rise. And they're like, we are kind of at the bottom of the list when it comes to first world countries. That we have more moms and babies dying. And so I think that there is this like false sense of security in, I'm going to be at the hospital, everything's going to be fine.
Not always the case.
That's not always the case. And so that's what I struggle with when people are just like, well, I'm going to be at the hospital, I'm going to be fine. I'm like, well, no. I mean, a majority of people, yes, they will be fine delivering at the hospital. They will survive the experience. But things do happen.
Right.
And yeah. I'm like, I could go on about this forever, because then people go, well, why is there this crisis in our maternity care system? And I'm like, I mean, lots of reasons, but it's like something's not working and it needs to be fixed.
And that's why you have to do your research when it comes to finding your provider. And not just researching your provider, but also researching the hospital that you're planning to deliver at.
Yeah, definitely.
Sometimes it may not always be the provider; it may be the hospital.
Right. So, yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, I always recommend going on touring the hospital and asking lots of questions at the tour, like, what's standard at that hospital? Will they allow you to get up and walk around? Do they have birth balls? Do they have a squat bar? Can you labor in the tub? Just asking all the different questions. You can actually learn a lot from the nurses. Just talking to the nurses, and finding out kind of, what birth looks like in that hospital.
And I think another reason why people choose to deliver at the hospital is because they are planning a medicated birth.
Right.
They are planning for an epidural. They are planning for an induction, and not a medically necessary induction, but they are planning for an induction for whatever reason. But
well, it's the same thing. It's because that's what you do when you hit your due date.
Yes. But it isn't. It shouldn't be.
Right.
They are. And I know I'm getting off track here, but anytime I reference a due date, I reference it as an estimated due date.
Right.
It is an estimate.
It's just a guess.
It's just a guess. Like it doesn't mean that, you're 2 hours away from 40 weeks and we've got to plan an induction.
Right.
It's not medically necessary. But anyway, that's another podcast.
It sure is.
All right. So what are some other reasons why people would choose to give birth in a hospital setting?
Well, when we talk about this in class, it really, like, the biggest thing that they always say is, like, if an emergency happens, either for the mom or the baby, if they have a NICU, if something goes wrong, that medical, the equipment and all the medical supplies and personnel are there.
Right.
That's the most common one that most people say. That and money, insurance coverage.
Yeah.
So right. I think those are the first two things that most people will say when we start talking about that in class. Are those two things. I think the thing that I'm going to kind of backtrack and go back to how, like you said, they were either planning a medicated birth or planning to be induced, and while, like, I know that some people need those tools, but what really drives me nuts is that we don't do any research about those things during our pregnancy. And so many,
Right.
I hear so many women say, well, I just can't handle that kind of pain. I don't want to be put through that much pain. Um, I don't want to go past my due date because I'm uncomfortable, and like they just choose these interventions without really any knowledge about the pros and cons, what could happen, if you do or don't do this. I also get really sad when I hear a story of someone who they show up at the hospital, like their labor's going fast, planning a medicated birth. They show up at the hospital and for whatever reason, they can't get an epidural. Whether that's just because it's too fast, whether baby just came super fast because it was their third baby, or whether, maybe there's a line of like 4 or 5 other people waiting to get an epidural. Like an epidural is there is no guarantee that you can get one, nor is there any guarantee that it's going to work or work the way that you expected it, or and so that's the thing that I really hate, is that people are just like, that's the only tool that they have. They don't prepare with any other tools for their labor, and then they are traumatized because they have no idea how to help themselves because they were planning to get an epidural and that's all they were planning to do.
Right.
So I recommend to everybody to like prepare as if you weren't going to get one. I mean, if you do, that's fine. If you choose to get one, 100% totally fine. But you are choosing to get one with like full knowledge of how it happens, what to expect, what the pros and cons are. Sorry, that's like, I totally got us off track there. But that's like one of my, that's one of my topics that I'm like, I just hate that we go into this with no knowledge of what an epidural is or how it works.
And that's the thing. I'm like, I validate their reasonings or their wants for going that direction, whatever the intervention is, epidural, inductions. Like I value their reasons for doing that. However, I would say that if that is, and even if it isn't your plan, like if that's the direction you want to go, I encourage you to take a childbirth class, like get the education that you need to make those informed decisions. If you are planning to go in and have a medicated birth, like don't just say, well, I'm going to get an epidural, so I don't need the education. You do need the education because you do need to know what is all entailed in that epidural. You need to know like what's all included in that induction. What can those other cascade of interventions look like? And so, there's a time and a place for everything. And but you do need to be educated before embarking on those different interventions. So yeah, I think we both have a strong strong view or passion for it. And it's not that we don't agree that sometimes those things are needed. It's just we see the ramifications of when we have our clients that we love so much put themselves in a position where they don't have the best, or they don't have the experience they were hoping for, and that's because they've made a decision to do something that probably wasn't in their best interest. So I think we both feel very like, but because we want the very best for our clients, and we want them to have the best experience possible. So yeah.
We could go on about that. That's another podcast too.
Right.
We're coming up with all sorts of ideas. Yep.
And then another reason, I think, it depends on where you live at, how close you're closer to the hospital, or that may be, your only option. I think like you may be in an area where there's not any other option to have a home birth unless you have an unassisted one, like there's not any midwives or anything.
Right.
Like the hospital is the only option for you. And I'm sure, and there's probably some areas where, I mean, that is, by law, that's the only place you can deliver. And
Yep.
then,
Yeah, there's a few states that I think still say that you can't have a home birth, or that, like there's even states, unfortunately, now that are trying to put even more like regulations and stuff in place that's really going to make it hard for midwives to practice. And so, I mean, it's still happening today. Like, we are still fighting for midwives to have the ability to do what they do best and to really take care of families, during this time. And yeah. Yep.
Which is why I'm glad that that nurse midwives is a thing, that because I do believe they care a little bit differently, and so that need is even more so important. If we can't have a home birth, with the right provider, the right nurse midwife provider, you can have a supportive hospital birth.
Yeah. And something I like to point out too, it kind of goes back to that high risk thing. They think if I'm high risk, I can't have a midwife, even in the hospital. Usually you can. So if it's a CNM that delivers in the hospital, she almost guaranteed is working with a group of OBs. They probably have an MFM, maternal fetal medicine, that kind of specialize in those high risk cases. And you can kind of get this, like, you can get care from the midwife, but it's more of a team working together. If you did develop like preeclampsia or something, like, the midwife can still take care of you. And you can still get that care, but you're probably going to also be overseen by the OB or the MFM as well.
Yes. And I've had clients who were considered high risk, and they had a nurse midwife, but they had that high risk doctor. Like when they would go to their prenatal visits, they would either go see the high risk doctor, or they would see their midwife. So so that works great.
Yep. Yeah. And sometimes, I mean, yeah, it just really depends on that. But midwives, you can get an epidural with a midwife in the hospital. I've had people ask me that question before. Your midwife can oversee an induction if you were to need to be induced, so they can do a lot. I think that's one of the big myths around midwives is that they're not, as highly trained, or they don't know as much. And I'm like, oh, midwives are.
You have no idea.
They are thoroughly trained.
Yes.
CNMs become RNs first, and then they go on to continue their education into a midwifery program. And even CPMs, and midwives outside of the hospital, they all have training programs that they go through that are all usually rather extensive. I have a few friends going through it right now. So that's one of the biggest myths, is that, midwives don't know enough and they don't have medical training. And I'm like, that is not the case.
That is not the case. Yes. There are some midwives where I would go to them before I would actually go to, now that I know so much more, I would go to them even for something that wasn't maternally related, like just
you can see them for like well women exams and stuff like that. You totally can. Most midwives will do that and kind of have a broader scope than just like pregnancy and birth. Yeah.
And then, another myth is that people tend to think that the hospital birth is cheaper than an out of hospital birth, and that's not always
with your insurance.
The case. Yeah. That's not all. Like, your out of pocket, depending on what your copay and deductions and all that stuff. Sometimes you can end up paying, if not the same, more in a hospital birth than you would if you had an option to do a home birth or a birth center birth.
Yep. Yeah, it really just depends on your insurance and what the coverage is like, what your copay is like, your out-of-pocket expenses and stuff like that. I'm finding more and more insurance companies are starting to cover out-of-hospital births. So I know, at least here in Utah, they are. More insurance companies are starting to do that. So it's definitely something to look into and kind of do a little bit of math and, see if that really is the case for you. So, in class, we talk about the cascade of interventions. And that is the idea that kind of once you introduce one of the interventions, maybe say an induction, and they start Pitocin, that it kind of like one intervention tends to lead to another
one. Mm-hmm.
And so that is definitely something that you want to consider with, going to the hospital. I have a lot of clients that's one reason they choose to labor at home during early labor is because they want to kind of avoid those things. But I think it's important to know about all of the interventions and what they are and what's involved. So many people are surprised when we start talking about epidurals, about everything that's involved with an epidural. They think it's just like, oh, they put it into your back and that's good. But there is so much else that's involved. Mm-hmm. And that's that cascade that we're talking about. And so it's important to just learn about all of the different interventions, not just, the epidural, things like that. Right. But yeah. So I kind of want to talk about because again, I hate when people just talk super negative about hospital birth. So I want to talk about kind of some things to think about if maybe you're planning a hospital birth, maybe some questions to ask, and kind of some tips that we have for you, just because you can have a great hospital birth experience.
Yes.
The importance is just being prepared and knowing all the things. Mm-hmm. So if you're planning to have a hospital birth, here's some questions that you can kind of start asking, either about your care provider, or the hospital, or both even. But knowing their C-section rate and their induction rate, how often do they induce, for what reasons do they offer induction, and the same thing for C-section. What is their C-section rate? There are a few websites online, and I can't even think of them off the top of my head. There is cesareanrates.org, but I know that there's others now that you can go to find the C-section rate. I don't know if they have them by provider, but they usually have them by they'll break it up by state, by county, sometimes by city, and sometimes by hospital. Now, some hospitals don't report them. Right. But at least start doing some research, start asking to kind of find that information out, because that can kind of tell you a lot right there.
Right.
So,
and I know also, due to COVID, a lot of restrictions were put into place about, the number of people you could have there during your labor. And mm-hmm. so that could be something else that you may want to research if you're planning to, if you're wanting your family, big or small, to be a part, if you wanted your children or your parents or whomever to be there during the labor, if you want to check to make sure that your hospital does or does not have any restrictions on how many people can be in the room.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That was one reason that a lot of people started looking into out of hospital birth during the pandemic was, mm-hmm. They were being told you can only have your partner in here. That was it. Mm-hmm. And people who had hired photographers and doulas and they wanted their mom there, they very seriously considered, out of hospital births. So I know here in Utah, our rate for out of hospital births has climbed to it's 4% now of people are having their babies out of hospital here in Utah, which is huge. So,
wow.
Yeah. Birth plans. I kind of mentioned this earlier. Do they roll your eyes when you tell them that you want either an unmedicated birth or a low intervention birth, and you kind of give them your birth plan, and they, their reaction to that says a lot. I don't know, birth plans. We did an episode a while ago about birth plans, kind of in the early days of our podcast. And that one's a really good one. sometimes people talk about birth plans, like, or I hear doctors or nurses say, if we get a birth plan, we're just like taking bets on when you're going to get your C-section. So for me personally, I don't feel like a lot of my clients have had negative responses like that to birth plans. I think part of it is because I do stress provider, making sure you've got a good provider. And so like they've been already talking to their provider about all these things.
Right.
And they've been doing lots of research about them as well. So like they know what they want. And most of my couples are choosing hospitals that are usually pretty supportive of all these things that they're writing on there anyways.
Right.
So I think that that's one reason why I haven't had like super negative experiences with it. And I know plenty of doulas, that have had negative experiences, but that's why I go back to like, it's your provider and your birthplace.
I know I've gone into a few hospital births, and it's been more than one nurse that I've experienced this with, but in the area that I support mamas, but I've had a nurse ask, do you have your birth plan with you, or did you bring a birth plan, or did you create a birth plan? And I think I'm getting chills right now, but the very first time that I heard that, I was like, oh, what? She didn't, and I don't think she asked that question because like my client had a doula there. The way that it rolled off is like that's something that she asked, and she may be hoping that you have, so she can enter that information into your file, so or into the client's information. So I mean, it took me back. I was like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And I've heard it a few times over before from one or two other nurses, but for some, like, they're supportive of that, and they want you to have a plan because they want to make sure that you have an amazing birth. They want to make sure they respect your birth
that
plan.
sounds like a good hospital and some good nurses. Yeah. I think a lot of it goes into kind of the energy we put into our birth plans and kind of our thoughts about them. Because if I walk in with a birth plan that's like, no, I don't want this, no, I don't want this, no, I don't want this, like super negative.
Right.
I do think that those are perceived differently than something, because I try to keep it more positive of, yes, I want to use different positions. Yes, I want to avoid an epidural, things like that.
Right.
Yeah, anyways, we can talk more about birth plans another day. So, but yeah.
And then I guess also making sure, like, if you're laboring at home, if you're planning to labor at home and you have use of your shower and your tub, another thing to kind of, when you're touring the hospital is if that's something that you're wanting to see, if they have showers and tubs, are they going to be available? Because I think in a hospital setting, yeah, they're going to have showers, but are they available?
That's a really great point. They have them. Yeah.
Yes. Right. Or will the staff, make it very difficult for you to have access to the shower that's connected to the room that you're with running water that you can very well get into.
Right. No, that's a really great point. I think too that you want to kind of make this space like as comfy and cozy as you can. And so bring like turn all the lights off. That's what I tell them in class. Like when you get into that room and you're like, they're going through the whole check-in process and asking you a million questions, but like when all of that is over, like turn the lights off. There's a million light switches in hospital rooms. Figure out which ones go for which things. Turn the lights down, turn some music on. So bring like a Bluetooth speaker or something. Some people will bring some what's the word I'm thinking of? LED candles. Or like the little wired twinkle lights you can get really cheap at like the dollar store. Bring your own pillow if you want. Just make sure it doesn't have a white pillowcase so it doesn't get mixed up with the hospitals, because I have seen that before. And just really like do whatever you can to make yourself more comfortable. Because that's how you're going to labor well, is when you feel safe and comfortable and, so kind of set that space up. So think about that beforehand and kind of pack all that stuff that you think might help make you more comfortable there. I always say too, don't worry about like what anybody thinks there of you doing that kind of stuff. Like some people think that like, if I make sounds because, I'm laboring really well, is the person next door going to hear you? Who cares? Are the nurses going to be thinking something of me because I'm in this position or whatever it is? Who cares?
Who cares?
Who cares? So just really kind of doing those types of things to really set yourself up to be able to labor more comfortably is super helpful. I think so. Here's how I think we should sum it up, because I'm like, we've said a lot of this stuff that we have here. So if you're planning to have your baby at the hospital, these are things that we recommend you doing. Making sure you're at the right hospital with the right care provider. Those are like your top 2 things you want to get figured out.
Holly, say that again for the people in the back.
Make sure you're in the right hospital with the right care provider. Yep, we will say it a million times. Tour the hospital, ask lots of questions. Ask lots of questions at your appointments with your providers. Ask the nurses lots of questions. Hire a doula. I really recommend a doula for a hospital birth because they can really help. Well, they can help with all sorts of different things. And what I do never looks the same for 2 clients, whether it's helping you be more comfortable, helping you with comfort measures, labor positions, helping your partner. Like, they help with so much, but they can also help you when you need to ask those questions. If you're not sure if you want to do XYZ, your doula can kind of help you.
Providing the verbiage on how to ask those questions.
And they can kind of help you figure those things out. But take a childbirth class, know your options, know about all the things that you might see at a hospital, so you're prepared for those. Be prepared to ask questions. Have a list of them if you need to. Write them down. So when they say, hey, we think we should break your water, you can say, well, why? And what are the benefits of this? And, are there any risks to it? Is there something else we can try first? So just being prepared to ask those questions, and for your partner to be prepared. Your birth class is for your partner too, because they need to be prepared. Your partner is your most important person in that room. And so they need to be prepared to ask those questions as well, and to offer, suggestions, maybe labor positions, comfort measures, and things like that. So, I kind of think that it all boils down to like those few things.
I agree. Yes. But because we could go on and on about hospital birth, and not in a negative way, because we have experienced positive, amazing births in a hospital setting. I've seen a lot of doulas lately struggle with hospital births, and they are. Well, okay, so here's my thoughts on it. Is these doulas, and I don't know them personally, I haven't worked with them a ton. This is just kind of what I'm seeing on social media, and what I'm seeing them saying is that they're really struggling with hospital births, and they feel like their clients aren't supported. They feel like they're having to like fight the system, which that totally does happen. I've been at births where I feel like we're kind of climbing an uphill battle here, and just, things aren't going the way that my client wants, which that does happen. Their clients aren't taking childbirth classes, and they are not preparing themselves. And sometimes I see that as like, well, if I hire a doula, I don't need a childbirth class. That is not the case. That's not the case. Because yes, I meet with my clients a couple of times before the birth, but it's not enough to fully prepare you for all of that.
and things like that. And so take a good childbirth class that is going to give you lots of information about all of these things so that you are fully prepared, and you know exactly what you want, even though we don't always get what we want, like really prepare for that. So that is something that it's so hard to see that happen, but
Right.
yeah. And not that taking a childbirth class and hiring a doula is the answer to everything. It's not going to guarantee that you have this amazing experience, but let's put all the, what am I trying? Like, let's put everything, like all the balls in your court.
Yeah, I think it does put you in a better position to make informed decisions about your birth as it plays out. So no, it's not. It doesn't, taking a class and hiring a doula doesn't mean that it's going to make everything perfect. But when those hiccups do happen, you're not shocked. Like, you're okay. This is what's happening. We've learned about this. Let's ask these questions. This may be what's best for us, and then go and proceed from there. So it gives you those tools you need.
Yep. Well, this has been fun.
I think this is good, Holly.
This has been one of our longest episodes. So we can talk forever about this. Yeah, I know we've talked about this kind of stuff a little bit. Like I mentioned, we've got a really great birth plan one that we did way back in the day. Maybe we need to do another one. Yeah, these types of things we can talk about all day. So if you're listening and you have questions about having a hospital birth or anything like that, you need help preparing for it, please feel free to comment and let us know. We'd love to hear from you or help you. We'd also love to hear more birth stories, especially, well, really any. So if you would love to share your hospital birth experience with us, we would love to hear it. Either we'd maybe have you on the podcast, or even if you just wanted to write it up for our blog. We always love hearing more different types of birth stories. So feel free to send us an email. I'll put that here in the notes. You can send us an email about that. Yeah. So this was great. Thanks, Robmikia.
Well, thanks, Holly.
So awesome. Fun. Thanks for listening, everyone. And we will talk to you guys next week.
Bye.